You guys, it's me, Miss Fry. Ooh, I said it differently. Did you notice that? Things are getting crazy over here. Chapter 46. Christmas was coming. I dreaded it. I asked Susan, can't we go someplace? We were chopping veg for stew. She looked up at me in amazement. Where? She said. How? No one was supposed to travel for fun because of the war. We have a lot of similarities, don't we, right now? Big posters at the train stations read, is your trip really necessary? Anywhere, I said. Anywhere from here. The cottage was full of gloom and darkness and memories of Jonathan. Maybe we could visit your family, I suggested. Your brothers and your dad. It would be a little like having cousins and a grandfather. Susan shuddered. Ugh, not on your life. I wish that was a good idea, but it's actually a very bad one. She set down her knife. I know you don't understand, she said, but I think someday you will. My family truly hates me for things that I can't change. I wish they did, but they do. Excuse me, I read that wrong, right? See, that's what good readers do. I read it and I was like, wait, that doesn't make sense. I wish they didn't, but they do. I don't understand, I said. You're not a cripple. There's nothing wrong with you. Susan said, my family has the problem, not me, them. I said, but they're wrong. Now Susan looked me directly in the eye. Yes, she said. My mother's dead. You know that. My father is wrong. He should love me. He doesn't. I can't fix it. That's hard, but it's the truth. Like Ma'am, I thought. I'd never thought of Susan's family as being like Ma'am. I could still hear Ma'am in my head. Who'd want you? Nobody, that's who. I sat down at the table and buried my head in my arms. Jamie barged through the back door. I'm going to kill Persnickety for Christmas dinner, he announced, since she's too old to lay eggs. Ada, why are you crying? I lifted my head half an inch. I said, because Susan's father doesn't love her, and our mother didn't love us. Jamie snorted. Of course she does, he said. He slung his arm around Susan's neck. You do love us, he said. Don't you? Susan kissed him. I do, Susan said. I love you both very much. That was the second time she'd said she loved us. It made me cry harder, though I'd no idea why. The next morning, instead of doing my schoolwork, I drew myself a different kind of map. I started on the left side with a dark box and a girl trapped inside, then a train, butter, Susan's old house, the cottage where we live now, Maggie and Ruth and Lady Thornton, Jamie hanging from a tree with two good arms, above us, dragons circling in the sky, in the center, Susan, brave like St. Margaret, a gleaming sword in her hand. What comes next? Susan said when she saw the drawing. That's your map of the past. What's in the map of your future? I stared at her. What do you want? She persisted. I had no idea. When I'd first been evacuated, I'd wanted to be like the girl riding the pony, racing the train. Now I was. Parts of me were still jumbled, but maybe that girl had been jumbled too. I'd only seen her from the outside. I want to go places, I said. I want to travel. I want to see Dresden. Susan put her arm around me. When the war is over, you will. What do you want in the future? I asked Jamie. He looked thoughtful. More hens. Chapter 47. Maggie came home for Christmas. She looked wretched. Last year we ate Christmas dinner together inside Thornton House, I told Ruth. Jonathan was nice to me and Jamie. He was nice to everyone. Ruth nodded. When I went to see my mother for High Holy Days, all we could think about were past celebrations, with all our family in our home in Dresden. What did you do to feel better? I asked. Nothing, said Ruth. We were miserable. She took a deep breath. Better to be miserable together than miserable apart, I suppose. I suppose, too. We tried to be cheerful. Maggie and Jamie and I cut down a lovely Christmas tree, much bigger than the ragged one I'd cut the year before. We trimmed its bottom branches and used the clippings to decorate the fireplace mantel. I'd saved up colored paper over the year, and we made strings of colored paper rings and shiny paper stars. Maggie and I rummaged in the attic of Thornton House and found electric lights and glass ornaments like Susan once had. The tree looked beautiful, None of us really cared. "It still feels like a cave in this house," Maggie said. "It is a cave," said Jamie. I said, "It's less gloomy than it used to be." Maggie shook her head. "If only the blackout didn't have to be black." "It doesn't," I said in sudden realization. "Not on the inside." Maggie actually smiled. "You're right." Our blackout screens were heavy black cloth stretched over wooden frames, exactly sized to cover the windows. Maggie dug up some paint from the attic of Thornton House, and over the next 2 days, we painted the insides of the screens with what we saw when the blackout wasn't up. The trees with sun shining through their branches, Jamie's bicycle, Mrs. Rochester's shed and pen, the garden asleep in the winter, mounds of straw heaped over the earth, the Anderson shelter beside the house, the new chickens, and the rooster. Ruth took the blackout screen from her bedroom, painted its inside all over white, then took a pencil and sketched and erased until she was satisfied. Then she painted what she'd drawn: a stone path, flowering trees, and a bed of tulips bursting with color. "My home in the spring," she said. "The home I used to have." She smiled at me. Silly to do so much work for only a short time. Ruth had passed her entrance exams. She was leaving for Oxford at the new year. "But it pleases me to see this view again." "We'll keep it," I said to her. "You'll visit." We tried hard to be cheerful, but it didn't take. I felt sad and anxious. Maggie was twitchy, and Lady Thornton and Susan sank into gloom. Lady Thornton's head cold didn't help. We skipped church Christmas Eve. Lady Thornton said she didn't feel up to it. Susan, who never liked church anyhow, decided to stay home with her, and Maggie wanted to meet Lord Thornton's train, which was supposed to arrive the same time the service started. He'd have to walk to the house. The village didn't have a taxi anymore. "You can go to church, Ada, Jamie," Susan said. "I'm staying with Mum," Jamie said. She was not our Mum. I decided to walk with Maggie to the station. Ruth came too. "This house feels horrible," she said, pulling her scarf around her face. "I'm glad I'm Jewish, if this is Christmas." "This isn't Christmas," Maggie said. Ruth slid her arm around Maggie. She said, "I know." Trains usually ran late in the war, but this one arrived early. We got to the station just in time to see Lord Thornton, tall and wide in his thick overcoat, step out of the carriage. Another man, equally muffled, came after him, and then a woman in a heavy black coat and headscarf. Ruth screeched. She threw herself at the man and woman. She clung to them and actually sobbed. The woman pressed Ruth to her bosom, murmuring words I didn't understand. The man put his arms around them both. German words. They were her mother and father. I watched the three of them hug and kiss each other. No one I knew hugged or kissed with such enthusiasm. Lord Thornton embraced Maggie and me, but he seemed incredibly sad. Even when he smiled at Ruth, he looked tired. Not that Ruth noticed. She chattered away in German. She pulled her mother over to me, put her hand on my arm, and said something that made her mother beam at me and kiss me square on the lips before I could duck. My mother says thank you, Ruth said. Thank you for what? I didn't know how to respond. A total stranger kissing me? I looked at Ruth. What's German for you're welcome? I asked. Bitte, Ruth said, smiling. Bitte, I repeated. Ruth's mother smiled and kissed me again. Why is she thanking me? I asked. Ruth said, I told her all about you. Well, that could mean anything. Still, given the kissing, it didn't seem like it could be bad. We went home. Ruth held both her parents' hands. Lord Thornton and Maggie and I walked a few steps behind. So they let Ruth's mother out of prison, I said. British internment camps aren't prison, Lord Thornton said. But yes, her father's been working with me for some time, and we finally managed to get her mother released. She'll be able to live with Herr Schmidt and Ruth. Ruth's going to Oxford, I said. Right. Do you work near Oxford then? We'd always wanted to know what war work Lord Thornton did. He couldn't say, but that didn't mean we couldn't try to ferret it out of him. I'm going to tell you about that later. Or you do your own investigation. It was secret war work that the British government is doing, okay, to try to help the war end quicker. He couldn't say, but that didn't mean we couldn't try to ferret it out of him. He gave me a look down the side of his nose and didn't answer. Nuts. Ruth's father spoke a bit of English, her mother less. She said long sentences in German to Lady Thornton and to Susan, bowing and smiling, and Lady Thornton and Susan bowed and smiled back as though they understood. "What did she say?" I asked Susan. Susan looked at me. "You understood her as well as I did." The funny thing was, I did understand her. Frau Schmidt was telling us how happy she was we'd taken care of Ruth, and how glad she was to meet the women who'd given Ruth a home. I couldn't translate the words, but I knew their meaning. Lady Thornton had been a grudging host to Ruth, but she was gracious now. Oh, that makes me feel good. Despite her head cold and her grief, she smiled at the Schmidts. She said kind things to them. She hung up their coats and directed Jamie to carry their luggage upstairs. She went into the scullery and came back with a bottle of wine, and all the grown-ups drank a glass, toasting each other. It was remarkably civilized. Ruth beamed from ear to ear. That moment ended up being the best part of Christmas. We hung our stockings on the fireplace, even Ruth at Jamie's insistence, although she sniffed about it. In the morning, each held a piece of candy and a shilling. We ate a month's worth of bacon and a dozen eggs for breakfast while listening to carols on the radio. We kept the fire bright, dancing off the ornaments on the Christmas tree. The sun shone, and it would have been a glorious day, except for the ghost of Jonathan. Last year, Jonathan had been with us. He'd made jokes at the table and been so funny and kind. Memories of Jonathan felt like dragons, like real, imaginary, fierce creatures with wings. Memories of Mam felt like rocks or coals. I tried to recall a single happy memory of my mother. If Mam had come to live with us at Susan's house, could she have learned to be happy? Could anything have made her better? I would never know. "Breathe," Susan said, her arm around me. "Just take one breath at a time. We'll get through it." Susan, Ruth's mother, and Lady Thornton started dinner. Lord Thornton and Ruth's father played backgammon. Maggie, Ruth, Jamie, and I went to help Fred with the stable chores and bring Fred back for dinner. We ate dinner, and we opened presents. That's when I got the surprise. I think I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop there. Okay? It's getting good. I mean, it's good. Do I say that all the time? I think so. Okay, you guys. More tomorrow. And it was great to see you guys for book clubs. As always, I miss you guys. I'll talk to you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Okay, bye.